Welcome in to the post-game spread here at Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. I'm Ravi. Andrew Rogers here with me as well. Coming to you after a Nebraska win.
Ravi, I don't sense a lot of energy from you.
Well,
you're still battling that.
I've got a little bit of a cold still. I'm not going to lie to you.
But I'm telling you, man, did you realize that the Huskers just won a football game?
They won a football game. This is their second win in a row.
Let me tell you, when was the last time the Huskers were 7 games into a season
and above 500?
And above 500.
I would probably 2016, if I had to guess. I don't know off the top of my head.
I wish I would have looked it up prior to asking that question, but I need a little more juice out of you. Come on, man. Give me energy.
Hold on. Let me
the
try.
Huskers are there.
Let me try one more time. Hold on. Just pause. Welcome into the post-game spread. Nebraska beat Northwestern 17-9. No, I think actually I feel okay. I sound worse than I feel, but I think the offense drained a little life out of me today. That was a bit. That was just watching them kind of killed my soul a little bit.
There were a lot of people clamoring for the run. We want to see some more runs.
Yeah,
Please run the football, please.
You know, and it's funny because in the moment it seems worse than it is. I think they only threw the ball 17 times. Nebraska, it was Harburg was 8 for 17.
And 39 times, like 8 for 17. I'm guessing under 100 yards passing.
Yep, 85.
Which is shocking because the touchdown pass to Malachi Coleman was how long?
44. So he had 41 yards passing on 16 other attempts.
That's like an average first half quarterback stat line.
No, that's like a bad first half quarterback.
But that's what I'm saying. Okay, we'll go below average. Yeah, we can go with below.
I mean, 44 yards passing.
Ending the game with 85 passing yards and watching how often it seemed they were throwing the football in that game.
Yeah.
It's pretty alarming.
That's the problem too, right? Is like it was unsuccessful so often that it felt like it was happening more than it was. And again, to be fair, like, okay, Emmett Johnson ran the ball 6 yards a carry. Heinrich Arbor ran the ball 4.5 yards a carry. I know Anthony Grant didn't run a ton, but he was at 3.7, so just under 4 yards a carry. Compared to, outside of that Malachi Coleman pass, which I know it counts, but he was 16 passes besides that for 44 yards. You're talking about
a lot of missed throws that you let off the game with an INT. You came back with an INT. And, you know, I was listening to those announcers, and I can't remember who the play-by-play guy, but Jake Butt was also in there.
Mm-hmm.
But they were putting a lot of blame on Fedoni for dropping that second pass. But if you really watch it back, that's a hard play to make. I mean, you're fully extended. The ball's way out in front of you. Should Fedoni catch that football? Is the wrong word, right? Yeah. Could Fedoni have caught that football?
Sure.
That's a yes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I kind of put more blame on Harburg in that moment of not being overly accurate with his throw.
Yeah, when he saw him down the sideline to Bullock where he was wide open, really good play design. They got Bullock wide open down the sideline, and he dramatically underthrows it. You know, and listen, I don't want to harp on it, the negative too much. Like Nebraska won the game. That's what's important. But I think it feels like they threw the ball more than they did because of just overall, this is not a good passing team, right?
But why that game plan? Coming into this game, I think that's where we should probably start with this whole thing is why did you come in and think we're going to beat them by throwing the football when you know that Northwestern is the worst against the run in the Big Ten?
Yeah, I think to me it is honestly it's the offensive coordinator kind of overthinking it a little bit. He's like, oh, they know we're going to try and run because we know their deep run defense isn't good. Like I don't know if you
but our run offense, I should say, is great,
right?
So even if they know that, that's fine,
right? It legitimately, I think it's one of those like overthinking it situations. Like, did you watch Friends?
Friends, I could probably quote like the back of my hand.
So it's like they don't know that we know that they know that we know. Like that's what it felt like was happening.
But what step is that? Is that at the beginning of the episode when Joey's like, they don't know that we know, or is it we know they know they know?
I feel like it's at the end of the episode when Phoebe's like, they don't know that we know they know we know, and you're like, okay, why don't we just run the ball? Like,
right?
Like literally the point.
Let's just do what works.
The whole point of the whole episode is like, okay, if you're just honest and then
well, not even that. Everybody knew what was happening. So like from the beginning, till the end. So how about we just put it out how it is.
Yeah, put it out there, be straightforward, and run the football right down their throat, right? And they did. I mean, Nebraska ran the ball well. Obviously, you've got the fumbles.
They ran well, but only 163.
Yeah, but it's a low possession. I mean, 39 carries, that's a low possession, or a low play snap game. Like, you're only at 56 snaps for the entire game. That's a really low
still,
number.
Nebraska normally creeps into the 200s.
Yeah.
That's where they kind of rest.
You would like.
That's why they are looked at as one of the top rushing teams across all teams in the country.
And honestly, I think the big difference here is, so the long on the day was 24 yards. They didn't break one today, right? If you break one or two, like we'd seen them do a couple times, that's what takes you from 160 to 200.
Other than Harburg's like 25-yard keeper early
so that one was 20. Johnson had one that was 24 late in the game. Those were the longest runs of the day. So you've got these, you don't have these 40-yard runs that take you from 160 to 200. I thought they ran the ball well. I think they should have ran the ball more. I've said this before, and people are like, you can't win games that way. I think they should be at like 12 pass attempts a game. Like, I genuinely believe that, especially in a low possession game like this. If you're under 60 plays, and listen, you're not beating Michigan like that. I get that, but you weren't beating Michigan anyway. Like, maybe you don't beat Maryland like that. You might be able to beat Wisconsin, Iowa, and Purdue like that, though. Like, I don't know if there's anybody else on the schedule that you can't beat throwing 12 times a game. I really don't. Like, maybe Maryland, because they can score pretty good on you. Everybody else is like, hey, like maybe we just throw the ball 12 times a game and we're okay with it the rest of it.
Sometimes I wonder too if, a lot of times you hear coaches say, don't look ahead, don't look toward that next opponent. And I almost wonder if it's you tell people that so the whole world looks at you as, hey, you're staying in the moment. But at the same time, you tell your team like, hey, later on this year, we may need to pass more than we run. So how about we try to work on it against Northwestern? Because we know we're going to beat Northwestern. Yeah. So maybe this is a good opportunity to say, hey, let's take some chances. Let's take some shots because we trust our defense. Probably didn't happen, but in the back of somebody's mind, maybe that was an objective. It may have been buried way, way deep, but it could have been somebody's objective to say, hey, at some point this season, we're going to have to win by throwing the football. So let's practice it against Northwestern.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they probably said it in the sense of like, hey, we're going to beat Northwestern anyway, because I don't think you can take that for granted. But because Nebraska has been losing these games for 5 years, 6 years now at this point. But so it's good to see them get the win. Like, I want to say that first and foremost. Awesome that Nebraska got a win today and is above 500 past the halfway point in the season. But I do think you have to understand as a coordinator, whether it's Tony White on the defensive side, who was phenomenal. I love him. Like, pay him whatever he wants. Just whatever. Just blank check it. Just Trev, 1890, whoever's in charge of the money.
Have at least 2 commas in there.
Yeah. Whoever's in charge of the money, just like hand him a blank check and be like, whatever you want, sir. We love Tony White. But and make sure you get everybody on the defense giant NIL deals. Like, let's just start there. But he does a really good job of working guys into situations. Like, that's why we're so impressed with the depth on the defense. Is he's been working guys in all the time in little doses, so they get live reps. I think your point is fair that they probably need more live reps throwing the football, especially considering the wide receiver room where, okay, Malachi Coleman hasn't played a ton. Like, Jaden Doss hasn't played a ton.
We both got deep balls today.
Jalen Lloyd hasn't played a ton. Even the guys that like Alex Bulks has played a ton, even though he's older, right? These guys have not played a ton of football. And so you do want to get them live reps. So I don't know if it's so much as, hey, we've got a little more margin for error against Northwestern, which they probably do. But I think it's more of, hey, we have to get these guys live reps sooner or later so that if we do get behind and have to throw the ball, that it's not the first time it's happening.
I'm probably a little adventurous with that point of view, and I'll eat that. I'll own that.
But I think getting the live reps is a real thing.
And I do believe in that too.
Yeah.
But what I also want to focus on is the big positive today was no matter when Northwestern had a big play or was pressing down the field, you never felt, at least on our end, from fan perspectives, and I'm sure they felt it in the stadium too, there was never a time that Husker Nation felt they were giving up a touchdown.
Mm-mm.
The big play toward the end of the game, this comes right after Nebraska scores.
Yep.
It's 17-6.
I was a little worried then. That was the only time.
I look over to the guys here in the restaurant because I'm sitting up close at the bar, furthest to the end, and I'm looking at a guy in a red shirt and a really nice white Nebraska pullover, which I kind of want. I need to ask him where he got it. I need to ask him where he got it.
Probably
but I looked over at him and I said,
I
said, they'll still end in a field goal.
Yeah.
And I honestly believe that because that's kind of how Northwestern was playing this game. They had their big play, and then they kind of just crumbled. And Sullivan couldn't figure out a way to get past that front that Nebraska was putting up there. And two, let's credit the defense even further. There were plays throughout this game where Northwestern probably had a first down. And all they had to do was beat one guy. And that one guy that they had to beat also had to get off of a blocker in order to get to the ball carrier.
That happened multiple
That's Isaac
times.
Gifford in a moment. That's Luke Reimer in another moment. He made a huge tackle, made his presence known today. There are guys on this defense that all you can do is tip your cap to. Because no matter what, if it's them against the world, it's them winning this.
Yeah, and I do want to put a make sure we focus on the positive here. While the offense was very Big Ten Westy today, the defense was incredible. No matter what position,
the defense was Big Ten Westy.
Yeah,
too.
the Big Ten was even Big Ten Westier. No matter what position they were put in, whether it was by the offense, like that first couple of series of the game where they throw the interceptions, or whether it was themselves kind of getting behind the eight ball by giving up. They had a big run that they gave up in the first half, and then obviously the big pass later in the game that set up field goals. They bowed up and made sure Northwestern wasn't getting in the end zone. Anytime they faced adversity, they responded, whether they were put in that position by someone else or whether they were put in that position by themselves. That's what we were talking about all week was, hey, you have to go 1-0 every snap, right? They went 0-1 on a couple of those snaps when they gave up big plays, and then guess what happened? They came back, and they won the next snap, and the next snap, and the next snap, until they were either pushing Northwestern out of field goal range and making them try 54-yarders that their guy didn't have the leg for, or they were holding them to a field goal when a touchdown seemed inevitable. Like, they did a great job of that, of moving on and continually just trying to go 1-0 on the next play, and I was super impressed. I mean, Stu Manji on Twitter was talking about how, going into the year, that defensive line was probably one of the units that we had the most questions about because you didn't know a lot
of people but me.
I liked it coming out of spring a lot, but you had a couple guys that you felt like you knew about, and then some guys that you were really hoping would step up.
See, I think I skipped past the really hoping you stepped up and just immediately slotted them in. Because I remember asking Sam that question with you on the show at the Pinnacle Bank Championship. And I said, am I the only one that thinks this defensive line is going to be good? And he said, yes, you're probably the only one that thinks that.
Yeah, so I was high on him coming out of spring because I really liked Cam Lenhart. I really liked Prince Will. I thought Nash and Ty were going to be good. The depth of the D-line and the splash plays of the D-line has even surprised me, even though I was high on them. They've gone from what most people considered a question mark at best to, I think, without a doubt, the best unit on the team. I don't know who's close if they're not the best unit on the team.
Close second, probably the secondary.
Yeah, who's been very good. But, I mean, the way that this defensive line has been pretty consistently disruptive over the course of the year has been really, really impressive. So I want to make sure we give all credit and kudos to the defensive line and the defense in general, because this is how, we kind of said this to start the year too. Like, Nebraska's going to win games with defense this year. I didn't think the offense was going to look this bad, and this kind of dysfunctional at times.
Right.
But we were right on the defense. Tony White is worth every penny you can possibly find for that man.
Now, something I think about moving forward is something you also tweeted during the game, and it wasn't just you. It was a lot of other people. It was, am I kind of missing Jeff Sims? Right?
I thought about it.
Should Jeff Sims come back in at this moment? Because Heinrich's not playing great football.
And the thing that we thought he was better at, taking care of the football, he really struggled with today.
But I still don't know if that is ever like the mindset I think people need to be in. Because no matter how this game ended up going from start to finish, what happened at the end? Nebraska came out with the win. And you win because of what? Great defense. You win because the offense was able to put up 17 points. And that's that. You still win the football game. And has Heinrich really had a game where things ended up going this wrong? I don't think so.
No, this is probably his worst game.
I don't think there's been a game like this yet on his so-called schedule.
Right.
So I kind of like that you leave the guy in there and you try to get him to recover from his own mistakes.
Sure.
And it's kind of like what I was telling you about on Friday. We were talking a little bit about high school football and then, coaching and players and playing time and things like that. Well, I ended up telling a story about how we had a pitcher on our team that would tend to get into his own head. How did we get him at his age to overcome those issues? Because a lot of times it's you can listen to a coach, but is that coach like really getting through to you? And is that really changing the way that you're playing this game?
Sure.
Most of the time, no.
Yeah.
They could inspire you a little bit.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it comes down to you to make the change.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if that's how Nebraska was looking at this. Because if you bail on Harburg at some point and go to Sims, what type of message does that send to Heinrich Harburg moving forward? It could actually hurt him more than it could benefit him.
Yeah.
And when you win the football game, that's kind of even worse to send. That message right there is even worse to send to your player.
Yeah, so the only thing that I struggle with in that situation is you have to find the balance between what's good for the player and what's good for the team, right? Because let's say Nebraska was still down 6-3 at halftime or whatever, right? And they didn't get that touchdown drive that kind of put the game away, or that put them back in the lead. At some point, if you're really, really struggling and Harburg's playing the way he is, I do think you have to consider like, hey, we gave him a chance to play through this. We didn't pull him after the second interception. We gave him the rest of the first half. We gave him the first drive of the third quarter, and nothing's happening. At some point, I do think you have to say, like, hey, we have to give, like, especially if you genuinely believe it. And I believe Coach Rule when he says, hey, I think we've got 3 guys at quarterback that can help us win games. I think you genuinely have to look at it and say, hey, are we doing what's best for the team? Even though, like, hey, we weren't reactionary. We gave him several more drives after those mistakes to try and overcome it, and we're still not getting anything. I don't think it's crazy to bring in Jeff Sims at that point.
Hypothetically, I could maybe agree, but the way things were trending and with Nebraska still in the lead, that's why I didn't really love those things that I was seeing, because Harburg was working through those moments. And when you talk about what's best for the individual and what's best for the team, I mean, we saw what was best for the team in the first 2 games of the season.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Jeff Sims' play.
For sure. Yeah. I mean,
so why would that change if Jeff Sims were to come in at this moment when Harburg is struggling? Those are kind of things that, when I think about, when I turn off, the fan mind and put on the coach mind, I'm like, what's better? Because a lot of times it's hard to make up your mind in that moment.
Yeah.
And it could be 50-50, choosing what's right and what's wrong. All I can be grateful for in this moment is I think the coaching staff was right by leaving him in the entirety of the game, because you wouldn't have ended up with that long 44-yard touchdown pass to Malachi Coleman if Jeff Sims is in the game.
Yeah, well, and what I think is tricky about this situation is that you really have to your ability to switch between quarterbacks, if that's something that you decide you want to do, really depends on how you've communicated to those 2 guys, right? And so that's something that we don't know. If they've had that conversation of like, hey, Harburg, you're the guy, but like, we're just going to be honest, like there's not a ton of gap between you and Jeff or between you and Chuba or whoever they look at, right? And maybe they say, hey, there's circumstances here where we might need to air it out. Maybe we put Chubb in because he's the best passer of the three of you. Maybe. Like, I'm just hypothetically, right? So a lot of it depends on the communication that's happened between the coaches and the players before that point to prepare them to be able to handle those situations. And that, frankly, is I don't know. I'll be totally honest. When I'm tweeting during a game, it's 100% fan mode. I come on here.
Sure. I'm not just focusing on your tweet because yours wasn't the only thing I saw.
For sure.
And in that moment too, I'm like, would I be shocked if I saw Jeff Sims on the next drive? No. But I also look at it from the progressive point of the player.
Sure. Yeah.
And if I'm looking at for somebody to overcome the adversity that's, thrown on top of them, I would hope he can dig his way out of that grave.
Yeah, and on the same idea, I would hope that if they do decide to bring somebody else in for a series, that he's
he keeps his head up,
that he's able to overcome that as well. Because I fully expect that if Jeff Sims, who's lost his job, by the way, if Jeff Sims were to come back in, he's kept his head up this whole time, right? So you would expect the same thing out of Heinrich Harburg if they were to give Jeff Sims another shot. But it's a much trickier dynamic than we usually give it credit for. But I do think there's probably a situation where I still think there's going to be a situation where you need both guys at some point this year in order to win games. And luckily that wasn't today. Nebraska prevails 17-9. And frankly, there's more teams like I get that Northwestern isn't great. We said that during the week. I was like, hey, we can pretend like, Coach Rule can say this is a good football team all he wants. Like, this is not a good football team. This is a game Nebraska had to win. They took care of it. But there's a lot of teams like this left on the schedule. I mean, Iowa.
Over the next 2 weeks.
Even. So you've got Purdue coming up next, who maybe worse than Northwestern. They're certainly in the same boat. They're not far off one way or the other. I don't think Michigan State's a whole lot different one way or another. And then you go, this Iowa-Minnesota game that's going on right now is absurd. It's 12-10 right now. Iowa thought they had a punt return for a touchdown to win the game from Cooper DeJean, your guy, got called back. We're not watching, obviously, because we're on the air, so I'm just kind of following along on Gamecast here. And Iowa had 16, and then they were back to 10, and I was like, whoa, what's happening? But, so it's not like Iowa's world beaters. Last I saw, Wisconsin was still losing to Illinois.
Yes, they were.
So Illinois just Wisconsin is up 25-21 now. They've scored 18 points in the fourth quarter. But they've been down pretty much the whole game, and Illinois is driving with about 27 seconds left.
Michigan State, Michigan?
Yeah, Michigan State's not any good.
Right. That's coming your way at about 6:30. But I still think Michigan State's, if you're looking for an easy cover, Ravi, I think it's Michigan State.
It's up to 25 now. It was 24 yesterday when we were talking about it.
I'm a little, on edge.
A little salty about that extra point. They're gonna lose by 20.
They're gonna lose by 25. That's gonna push, and my bet's gonna miss.
Your bet's gonna miss on it.
Speaking of things that would be just absolutely heart wrenching.
Yeah.
If long term is attached to their name.
Ugh.
Billy Kemp, Ethan Piper going down today.
So it sounds like the Ethan Piper one's pretty serious. Just briefly from Coach Rule's comments after the game, the Billy Kemp one seemed like maybe that's not as long-term, hopefully.
But he hugged his parents on the sideline.
Billy Kemp did?
After he came out of the tent.
Yeah.
And so that worried me a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. Just from briefly what I heard, because obviously we went on the air really quick after the game, but briefly I heard Coach Rule saying it didn't sound like the Billy Kemp one was as long-term. Now, they didn't think the Ramir Johnson and Gabe Urban were going to be season enders right after the game either, and we saw how that went. So, take that for a grain of salt, what they say before they get testing done. But it sounds like I would guess the Ethan Piper one is a season ender. I'm hoping the Billy Kemp one isn't because, we talked about that passing game. They're going to need some help there, whether it's Jeff Sims, Heinrich Harburg, whoever's out there, at least on the offensive line. And I know they're thin up there, but they've got a guy in Justin Evans-Jenkins that they've kind of been wanting to play more.
And they've been giving him some more reps.
Yeah, can fill in at that guard spot for Piper, even though Piper's been playing really well this year. He's been one of the bright spots on there. You hope. I didn't see. Did Ben Scott come back in after he got hurt?
You know what? I didn't pay too close of attention to who was on the field versus who wasn't at the very end because all I really cared about was did Nebraska come away with the W?
Yeah, I was watching
in a game like today. I'm like, the defense is playing unbelievably well. I'm going to put off the injuries for now, and I'm just going to wait for 0-0-0 next to the 4 number
Yep.
on the score graphic
I'm
so
just-
that I could say, okay, we're set. On Monday, I'll figure out
Yeah.
what we need to do next.
I'm just watching that clock wind. I'm like, let's go, baby. Let's go. Keep that thing rolling. So, yeah, I didn't notice if Ben Scott came back in or not, although he walked off in his own power. So I'd like to think that's not as big of an issue there. But, they've got the injuries on the offensive side of the ball, especially, have gotten to kind of a ridiculous level. Like just almost laughably absurd how many injuries they've been dealing with. And, it's I know I've been critical a little bit of the play calling, been a little critical of the quarterback play, but I still have to acknowledge, like, I don't even know how to evaluate this unit considering all of the things that have happened, right?
Right.
I mean,
because once you talk about one player, he may not be out there the next day.
Yeah, and not just that, but it's like, okay, I don't know what the offense looks like if Billy Kemp and Isaiah Garcia-Castanedas and Xavier Betts and Marcus Washington are on the field instead of Alex Bullock and Malachi Coleman and Jaden Doss and Jalen Lloyd are on the field. Like, I don't, and Ty Hahn or whoever else was out there. Like, those are very different units. I don't know what the team looks like with Ramir Johnson and Gabe Irvin and Anthony Grant instead of Emmett Johnson and Josh Fleeks and Anthony Grant. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the team looks like if Jeff Sims never gets hurt.
Right.
There's so many variables. I don't know what the team looks like if Eric Gilbert's on the team as opposed to, whether he get the waiver or whatever other troubles he had. Like, there's so many pieces on this offense that we thought were going to be there. I mean, how many guys? I just named like 11, like 8 guys.
You named an offense.
Yeah, I named like almost an entire offense, and all those guys are not playing. So it's really hard to evaluate this unit, even though they have been struggling, right? Like the guys they put on the field have obviously struggled to put up points, but it's really hard to look at it and have legitimate criticism because it's like most of these guys didn't think they were going to have to play.
Well, and that's a lot. That's why we talk a lot about the young guys and the foundation of this Nebraska team and how development should be number one on Coach Rule's list. And that's why he's kept it at number one from season start till now. It's we need to get our young guys incorporated enough in the offense and the defense so that at any point this season, if we need them to go, they can go. He planned ahead for this moment. And there's a reason why he's looked at as one of the best college coaches around. It's because he develops young talent and can overcome any sort of struggle that hits a program. He did that at Temple when he brought them from a losing program to what they were when he left. He did that at Baylor when he brought a broken program, an absolutely glass vase shattered program,
Decimated program,
and brought them to a Sugar Bowl. And he's preparing to do that at Nebraska. And you're seeing glimpses of that right now. The team is 4-3. Let's not look past any of that, because if focus wasn't on development up until this point, they wouldn't be 4-3.
No,
there's no shot because they don't have the amount of experienced veteran players to make them 4-3 right now that are fully healthy. You look at this team up and down, how many people went from redshirt freshman to, oh, well, I guess he's going to maybe lose his red shirt. Maybe he can keep it. Who knows? To, well, you're going to play 4 years now right away.
Starter.
Right? I mean, and we saw that on defense. We saw that a little bit on offense. Look, you mentioned the wide receiving room. And especially after losing Billy Kemp.
Your top 4 are gone.
Who are the 3 guys that are catching the football? Malachi Coleman, Jaden Doss, Jalen Lloyd, and Alex Bullock. Alex Bullock is the only other guy there. That is kind of like, hey, he was here before the season started.
I don't think they were planning to have to count on him, but he's like the reliable guy now, and it's not like he played a ton.
And you look at the guys on defense, and I've given them a lot of credit so far. Cam Lenhart, Prince Will, Uman Mielen. Like, these are 2 guys right there that are impact players. Riley Van Poppel is another great example of that. If you don't have guys that have been prepping for this moment from, let's just say, when they got to Nebraska, I'm not even going to say spring game, when they got to Nebraska up until now, this team would not be 4-3.
No, absolutely. And it's obviously the development has looked better on defense, right? Because you've been able to sprinkle those guys in along with what I already thought was a better unit. The defensive unit was always going to be better than the offensive unit. I don't think that's a hot take. They had better guys that were more proven from what we knew of last year and the year before that we kind of liked on that defense. So you've been able to sprinkle those guys in so that when you put in a Prince Will or a Cam Lenhart or a Bayer, who was a totally forgotten about guy on the roster, or a Josh Bullock, who was a walk-on, all of a sudden those are impact guys because you're surrounding them and putting them in great positions to succeed, and you develop them, right? The offense is in a little bit more of a rudimentary stage right now because A, you've had way more injuries, and B, you didn't start off with as much talent, right? So it looks a little bit further behind. The offense is still playing catch up. That's okay because the defense is playing so well right now. And again, you look at this schedule. You can win games the rest of the way playing like this. Now, gonna have to clean up the turnovers, right? Even though I understand they didn't lose any of the fumbles, but those are still drive killers.
Man,
right?
it felt like the turf was magnetic today.
Yeah, and those are drive killers, right? They totally sabotage drives. So need to stop putting it on the ground. Need to stop throwing interceptions, obviously, right? Those are 5 plays between the 2 picks and the 3 fumbles that cannot happen. But if you're able to play even 50% cleaner, right? Let's say you only have 1 interception and 2 fumbles.
You have 1 interception and 2 fumbles.
Instead of 2 interceptions and 3 fumbles, you're gonna be in a position to win games against the rest of your schedule. Like, this is a team that playing like this or close to this, maybe a little bit cleaner. Penalties were way better today, by the way. I think they only had 2 for 20 the entire time.
Yeah, they cleaned up the yellow flag game.
Dramatically, right? So that's the thing that we were like, hey, we really got to clean this up, and it got cleaned up. Now we're looking at turnovers and ball handling and ball security, saying, hey, we really got to clean this up. Got to trust them and see if they can make an actual action plan and have a response to clean up the ball handling and ball security. But if you can do that, you're going to be in a really good position the rest of the way out. This is not – listen, I get Northwestern isn't good. The rest of the schedule isn't good either. Like, Purdue's bad. Michigan State's bad.
Iowa just lost 12-10, by the way.
And I get they're 6-2. They're still bad. Okay?
That 6-2 team could easily be 4-3.
Yeah.
Because last week they could have lost to
Michigan.
Wisconsin.
They could be worse than that. This is not – there's no good football teams left on the schedule. There's just not. Maryland's okay. And offensively, they might cause problems, but there's no good football teams left on the schedule.
There are at least 2 more wins on this schedule. At least, at minimum.
Yes. I mean, there's got to be 2 more wins.
I'm sitting here, though, and I'm trying to think because I'm wondering how Nebraska can take that next step.
And Wisconsin just beat Illinois, by the way, as well.
I'm wondering how Nebraska can take that next step without, foregoing what they are right now. Because what I think they are right now is still a 6-6 team. I still believe that they're a 6-6 team. But how can they take that next step? Offensively, we talk about it a lot, right? We kind of know what needs to be done, but also injuries haven't helped that along the way.
Yeah,
but tough. I think about the defense, and, I don't want to think too far ahead, but I think to next year somewhat, and I'm like, how will they be ranked among the new Big Ten teams? How will Nebraska be looked at across the board in the Big Ten? And right now, they're a great defense, but I'm wondering how they can be elite. How can they go from great to elite? Because where Iowa is right now, they're elite.
Yeah.
And what makes them elite is the fact that they can turn a turnover into 6 points.
Yeah, it's the takeaways. That's the big difference between Nebraska and Iowa right now.
And is that all it is, though? Is that how you take that next step of being great to elite is by, turning a random turnover into 6 points, or just getting turnovers in general?
So I think at this point for Nebraska, it's getting the turnovers, right? Like that Phelan Sanford play at the end of the game, that needs to be a pick. Like that for Iowa, that's probably a pick, right? We've seen Gifford miss some interceptions this year. We've seen earlier in the game, Tommy Hill missed an interception that probably would have been pick 6, right? Really early in the game, I think on the first possession for Northwestern. Those are the plays. Like, Nebraska's in position, right? They're in position to make those plays. They just have to make those plays. That takes you from being, hey, really, really good on defense to game-changing defense, right? And honestly, part of it is also just going to be how many freshmen have we talked about? How many young guys have we talked about on that defense? Those guys being a year older, those guys being a year more experienced.
We talked to already 3, but I mean, we'll just talk about young guys too. Malcolm Hartzog can be slotted into that conversation.
Hartzog can be better. Bayer can be better. Bullock can be better. Like, all of these guys can be better with another year in the system, another year in the weight room, another year of experience, all of these things. So the guys that we like right now can go from, hey, these guys are really nice, to, oh, maybe there's some all Big Ten performers in here. Maybe there's some Sunday guys in here that Matt Rule's been talking about, right? So that's part of it, is just maturation on the defense. And the other part, like you said, is it's creating those turnovers. Nebraska's in position to make turnovers. Nebraska, with you sack somebody 8 times, eventually some of those are going to start turning into strip sacks. Some of those strip sacks are going to turn into scoop and scores. That's the difference between where Nebraska's at now in year 1 and where I think they can be in year 2 and 3. God willing that Tony White sticks around.
It would shock me, absolutely shock me, if Nebraska gets bowl eligible. Well, they are bowl eligible. If they get into a position to be in a bowl game, that Tony White were to leave after a successful season.
I don't think it'd be this year. I worry more about next year. If things go the way I think.
If they go really, really well, then you really have to pay that man, or else he will go to a bigger program. Yeah, he will go to a big SEC school and be super successful there too.
So honestly, what I worry about is the head coaching job. I'm not worried about him going to another. If it's another DC spot, I think Nebraska just pays him and makes it worth his while. I worry about a head coaching job, and I think he's probably a year away from that. But especially if, let's say things let's put on our optimist hat for a minute here, right? Let's say we like the way things go. Nebraska goes, I'm going to say 7-5. I think there's 3 wins left on the schedule. I genuinely do, right? I think they win Purdue and Michigan State, and I think they win one of their last 3, right? That gets you to 7 right there. Easy peasy.
Lemon squeezy.
We love lemon squeezy. Let's say they get to 7 wins. They're 7-5, right? Who cares what happens in the bowl game? They develop for another month. They get those extra practices, all of these things, right? So you're in a great shape. You have a ton of positive momentum going into the offseason. Let's say you get a transfer quarterback. Let's say you get a guy that you really, really like out of the transfer portal. And then you've got a bunch of these other pieces coming back. Ramir Johnson says he wants to come back for a 6th year. You have Gabe Irvin come back. Then you've got Emmett Johnson come back, and he's gotten a bunch of experience now. Let's say you get a couple of receivers out of the transfer portal. Let's say Malachi Coleman gets a ton of experience this year, and he ends up looking really good. And Jalen Lloyd and Jaden Dawson, a bunch of these freshmen look really good. And all of a sudden you get a transfer portal quarterback that you really like. Is that a 9-10 win team next year with that defense?
No, just because of who's coming into the Big Ten.
Sure.
If the Big Ten was what it is today.
If it was this year's schedule, yes.
Yes.
If it's next year's schedule, who knows, right? But also, you're like, okay, Caleb Williams is probably gone. Things are
right,
changing,
but USC will still bring in a 5-star quarterback, which they have already.
They're falling out of their ears, basically. 5-star quarterbacks with Lincoln Riley. But so let's say it's an 8-win team next year. Even with a really tough schedule, they're better, but the record's not that much better because it's a tougher schedule, right? You got an 8-win team. Let's say the defense looks even better. Let's say they do take that next step from, hey, we're consistently stopping teams to, hey, we're turning them over and we're turning it into scores and stuff like that. That's where I worry about Tony White.
You'll get people saying, and you will get people saying Nebraska could be back.
Yeah,
you'll have people start saying hey, did you see what Nebraska's doing? Yeah. People will be saying that. The head coaching job, yes, would be a huge
That's
worry.
What scares me about Tony White. I don't worry about him leaving for a coordinator job because I do think Nebraska will just pay him and it'll be fine. If somebody comes knocking on his door for a head coaching job, that's where I start to worry a little bit. But again, that's a terrific problem to have because that means he's been awesome, right? If people are leaving your coaching staff for better jobs, it means things are going well. It's the thing that I found hilarious about, back when either Frost first got hired or they were talking about, people were talking about in the coaching search before they hired Rule about what about this and that guy? And they're like, oh, but I mean, he's going to leave in 4 years for the NFL. And I was like, if he goes to the NFL, that's incredible. And they kind of said the same thing about Rule, right? They're like, well, what if he wants to go back to the NFL? I was like, for him to get another shot at the NFL, you know how good he would have to be here? With the way it ended in Carolina, you know how good he'd have to be at Nebraska to go to the NFL?
He doesn't want to go back to the NFL, though.
I know, and that's kind of beside the point, but it's in order to even have those opportunities, you have to be awesome. That's great for Nebraska for those things to happen, right? So these are good problems.
Right.
These are good problems to have. It's good that we're worried about Tony White getting better job offers because that means Tony White's doing a great job, right? If I would love to worry about Marcus Satterfield getting other job offers, that means Marcus Satterfield is doing a great job, right? I would love to worry about Evan Cooper and Terrence Knight and all these other guys getting better job offers. So, we've gotten kind of ahead of ourselves here in terms of looking at the rest of this season and next year, but I do think it's really easy to see a world in which, I don't know that they're that much further off on offense, if healthy, than the way it seems right now. I think they genuinely are health and a quarterback you feel good about away from being not like an explosive offense, but a pretty solid one. I mean, they could be Notre Dame.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah. Oh, sure.
you know what I mean?
Well, and I know what you're trying to say with the quarterback too, because a lot of people probably are like, wait, quarterback, like they went and got Jeff Sims. That was their guy. Well, Ravi's more, I think, if I'm putting words in your mouth, you're talking more like, hey, this is somebody that was also looking at going to another huge school. Not just like, hey, I got Jeff Sims. He's our guy. It's like, no, this is a guy that other schools wanted too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like other big,
you like win
powerful
a battle
programs, right? That's the guy that you're talking about. If you get that guy in the portal, he can just be a total team makeover guy.
Like a Sam Hartman. Like everybody wanted Sam Hartman. He was coming out of Wake Forest. And listen,
Devin Leary was another guy.
Devin Leary is a great example. Cam Ward up at Washington State.
DJU, who got placed at Oregon State, was somebody that probably had more than just Oregon State on his ballot.
Lots of places, like Dylan Gabriel at Oklahoma. Like these are guys, like if Nebraska can get one of those guys, then they're all of a sudden you're having a way different conversation.
But the only way to get one of those guys is to what?
Keep winning this year.
To keep winning games.
Because then you can
because the guys you talked about were Kentucky, right? Where Devin Leary went.
Yep.
Well, Kentucky was really good at football last year.
Will Levis, they were good. Yeah.
Right. Notre Dame, who gets Sam Hartman.
9-3 last year, 8-4, 9-3.
DJU is kind of an outlander, but
Oregon State was
still a good football team last year.
Yeah.
Right. You can go up and down the list and say really good. Dylan Gabriel, when he went to Oklahoma, it wasn't last year, it was 2 years ago, but Oklahoma was a team that was always participating in the college football playoff. They were always a top 10 team.
Just be successful and people want to come there.
That's all it is. But you have to get somewhere first.
Yeah. And there's and a lot of it's like geography, right? Guys want to go a little bit closer back to home. And so you kind of look at, maybe you look at guys that are from like the 500-mile radius that we talk about all the time, right? That maybe aren't.
But still, though, there aren't a lot of Jordy Balls out there. Like Jordy Ball wanted to come back to Nebraska. She's the best pitcher in college softball. There aren't a lot of those players out there.
But there's a lot of guys from the Midwest that maybe went other places that are either successful or maybe they didn't get the reps that they wanted at. Maybe I'm talking a little bit about Zane Flores. I don't know. Let's see what happens.
I don't know. I still don't know if there's a relationship to men there based on everything I heard.
I'm just saying I wouldn't be mad about it. I wouldn't be mad.
I don't think a lot of people would be mad about that.
But there's guys out there from, whether it's, obviously he's from Gretna, so that's really close to home, but there's a ton of guys from kind of that 250, 500-mile radius playing major college football quarterback that, I bet you would have a shot at. And
it happens to a lot of guys that go to another big school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you're buried on the depth chart. You want to get some playing time. That's why, when talking baseball again, a lot of people tell high school kids to go JUCO first, because you go to JUCO, you play for 2 years right away. Then you go make that next step to Power 5 and you're still playing right away because you've got every rep to be playing right away.
Ready to go, yeah.
Or you could go to D2 and do the same thing. Yeah. So that's kind of the difference, though, with quarterbacks that are those, borderline 4 stars, 3 stars that, may want to come closer to home like you're referring to.
Yeah, and listen, obviously we don't know anything in terms of what's going to happen in the offseason, but there's an opportunity here if Nebraska is able to finish out their schedule the way that I think is possible, I think the way that you think is possible, there's an opportunity here for them to quantum leap is probably aggressive, but take a pretty big step forward on offense without changing that many pieces. Because I do think there's some really quality pieces here already. But there's been a ton of injuries, and B, the quarterback play hasn't been good enough to help make over the flaws, right? That's the thing we talk about with Caleb Williams all the time. And obviously Nebraska's not getting a Caleb Williams next year.
They aren't?
Probably not. I mean, that'd be pretty cool. I wouldn't be mad about it. But maybe he wants to grad transfer, come over and hang out. He said he might not want to go to the NFL. I bet we could pay him. But
is Luke Longvall Caleb Williams?
But there's quarterbacks, even not at that level, but he's just the best example of it. USC is a deeply flawed football team, but he covers up so many of their mistakes because of how good he is. Nebraska, maybe they're not national champion or whatever, Big Ten champion even, but they probably don't have a ton of flaws to gloss over to get to them to 8-4. But they don't have a quarterback right now that can cover up those flaws. If you can get a quarterback that's somewhere between where we're at now and a Caleb Williams type, just somebody who has a playmaking ability and has, like you mentioned, like a Dylan Gabriel is a really good example. he's not Caleb Williams, but he's good enough to gloss over some flaws and to help cover up for some mistakes that are there on that Oklahoma team. If you get a guy that's productive and can make plays for you and can overcome some of those mistakes, all of a sudden you're talking about a totally different type of football season. And that's what Nebraska's been missing for a while. And at this point, it may be only one of the only things they are missing if they're able to continue to get guys back next year healthy and continue to develop them.
And I think that's what they thought they had in Jeff Sims.
Yeah, and to be fair,
if we're being honest,
that's
a lot of people were like, "Hey, this is the Jeff Sims that you're talking about.
100%.
The Dylan Gabriel's out there, the Devin Leary's out there. Isn't that what we thought about Jeff Sims?" Yes,
I think that's what they thought about him for sure. I genuinely think that's what they thought they were getting, was this kind of dynamic playmaker who could get them out of trouble sometimes, and that just didn't turn out to be it. That's why you got to keep.
But
taking
that doesn't
shots.
mean that you can't find another quarterback that you wanted Jeff Sims to be.
Yeah, you just got to keep taking shots at it, right?
Which is why Heinrich Harburg stepped up and has been the guy. He's been somebody that's sustainable for this program.
Solid, not spectacular, but solid. And listen, solid, I think, can get you to 7 wins this year. That's the moral of the story. With this defense, solid can get you to 7 wins.
Now, maybe a bigger story.
Yeah.
Does Coach Rule end up at the volleyball match tonight?
Well, I don't know. He's like
in his press conference
right now.
Right? In his press conference, though, on Friday, he's like, "Man, normally I crash after football games, and this seems like a football game he could crash after because of how many ups and downs he probably experienced throughout this game. But you're coming off a win, you're coming off that high. Do you just maybe take an Uber over to Devaney?" And say, I may walk in for, middle of the first set, second set.
I think he's chugging a Red Bull and getting over there because I think his daughters would be pretty mad at him if he doesn't. So I would guess that he ends up at that volleyball match. He says it all the time. He likes being around excellence. Number 1 versus number 2 in the country in that atmosphere is about as excellent.
I bet his quarterback is there too.
I would. That's a fair bet. I think probably as well. Andrew, I know we're going to be talking about this all week, but anything else before we sign off here?
No, I think as far as we just look ahead, it's something that we kind of, we never say write the W on the schedule because you can't really do that as Nebraska, but low key, I think a lot of us wrote down W against Northwestern.
It's a game they had to win.
Against Purdue, I think the low key is taken out of that last sentence. Like, you just don't write the W against a team like that. I look forward to, diving deep into that matchup.
Yep.
I look forward to watching Nebraska take on these next 2 opponents.
Yep.
Because if we could have another start to the season, it's start against Northwestern.
Mm-hmm.
You play 3 games, and then we're going to call that halfway through the year. And then you have Maryland, Wisconsin, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
They're the big 3 at the back end. So, W's are going to be crucial up until November 11th when you play Maryland. If you can snag 2 more, the vibe around Husker Nation, the vibe around this state, no one will give a lick if you lose the next 3. Nobody. And I think that's kind of what you have to put on these players is put yourself in a position so that even if you lose a game, it doesn't affect what you'll be doing in December.
Yeah, I think
that's kind of where I want to sit moving forward.
You want to be bowl eligible before Maryland. That's the key, because then you're not pressing, you're not stressing. You just know, hey, whatever we can do on the way out here, we can focus on ourselves. We can get better. We can continue to improve. But we know we accomplished that one main goal of getting bowl eligible for this year. First time since 2016. If they do that, it'll be their longest winning streak since 2016. If they beat these next 2 opponents, this is
This is how you go from
games.
a third up on the staircase to about halfway up the staircase.
Progress. Just make that progress these next 2 weeks.
Maybe we'll skip a step, right? Whenever you were a kid and you're like,
I can do 2 at a time.
I want to get up the stairs. No, I'm going to skip a step. I'm not going to take them 1 at a time anymore.
Yeah, that would be incredible. So these will be a crucial next couple of weeks. You can hear Andrew and I every weekday on the Hurrdat Sports Radio Show in the mornings. We will be on all week, breaking down the win against Northwestern and the upcoming game against Purdue. For Ravi, that's Andrew. Lucian producing for us. As always, we will see you again next week.